That's a big question you're asking, but I'd start by saying sometimes there's an advantage to being the laggard in that you can learn from all the mistakes that came before or all the expense that came before. And I would put, thoughts of whereas large amounts of capital were put into infrastructure and data rooms and and even ERP systems and huge software implementations, you can leapfrog all that by going right to the cloud and going to software as service and SaaS model. And I think of over the 30 years or so I've been in business and have watched this digital transformation, the huge amounts of money that have been invested 1 year that 2 years later are obsolete or have been improved. So there is sometimes an advantage to being late to the game, but to your point, it's critical that you catch up to the game because it is what is going to steer the future economy as much as it's steering the current economy. And I think we've seen the acceleration of that over the last 4 or 5 months. Certainly here, and I assume in Guatemala as well. So it's embracing concepts that we might not have thought about that are making themselves apparent now in this during the pandemic. Things such as virtual like this. It's amazing how many more events we at Forbes have been able to pull off with extraordinary participants, because it's a lot easier to sit in your home and participate, and you can still have very high level conversations. So embracing virtual, and I think even when things get back to normal, whenever that is, virtual will remain a huge part of our communication and business sort of platform. Also, embracing the idea of a distributed workforce. Here, we all call it work from home, but it's really distributed means you can have a workforce anywhere in the world. And that opens up all sorts of opportunities to to attract the kind of talent that you need to jumpstart or to build a, technology foundation. So I think there are things going on right now that are hints or roadmaps to what the future might look like. And those are a couple. And of course, artificial intelligence is in there for us. In the publishing business, I like to talk about a bionic newsroom that is half machine and half human, in that the AI can do all sorts of things so much faster in terms of research and pulling up research before articles are written that then a human will put context and a human voice to. So things are rapidly changing all over, and being behind is something you want to catch up on, but not necessarily. We've learned some interesting things, both positive and negative, during this time. One, I think the first thing we learned is how important our product is. And when I talk about Forbes product, that's journalism. And the kind of journalism we do, which is around business and investing and healthcare and technology, those have become core subjects right now, and it's what's propelling our huge audience numbers. We're actually up at about, on a worldwide basis, about 220 million the last 4 months. So just skyrocketing numbers, and it put us in around the top 10 websites in the US. And some of that was driven by, right at the beginning, we increased the size of our news desk because we knew it was going to be breaking news and information on COVID, information on the stimulus programs that are coming out, information on the health aspects and the science aspects of it. And that has greatly expanded our reach and audiences. So creating a breaking news desk. But in the macro, what I tell people ask me the question, what is the single attribute or most important attribute for an employee these days? And that would go up to the CEO, is adaptability. You've got to be able to adapt and to change on the fly, because new challenges are showing up that no one ever imagined would be there. And the first one, of course, was when they shut down New York City and the rest of the country, and everyone went from work from home. No one quite knew how that would go, but it's actually, and I've talked to a lot of CEO colleagues who say it's gone extremely well. We've maintained a very high level of productivity and a high level of connectedness with one another. And ironically, in some ways, I feel our staff is closer together when we've been doing virtual and work from home than when we're in the office, which, as you know, you can often get into a routine there where you might not even see people on the other side of the hall or something like that. So we're learning some important lessons, and I do think, I've told my staff, do not plan to come back to the office till at least January. And it may get pushed back, who knows, but at least January. And I suspect I'm gonna have 50 to 60% of my staff asking if they can continue to work remotely. And so, there's a lot of things that are going on like that. The other big thing that we're doing with huge increases in traffic, it gives us the opportunity to collect that much more data from our readers. And in the media biz, as in all businesses now, having deep data on your consumer, your customer, is key, because you can then customize, create products that they want to receive and they're willing to pay for. And that's one of the transitions going on, is building that relationship with individual consumers so that we can continue to serve their interests and also serve our business in terms of products that they want to engage with. Yeah, no, good question. And government has to play a huge role, I think, especially in less developed countries in terms of a digital or technology infrastructure. That what made Silicon Valley great, or what even made Detroit great for autos in the 20th century, was all the best minds working on cars were in Detroit. And the colleges all around there and universities educated people as engineers and designers in the car industry. And there was government money going in to support this. At the same time, there was private sector free enterprise putting money in and developing it as well. And that was what made Detroit great then. And the same thing happened in Silicon Valley in the 80s, is it was a confluence of all these people who had similar interests or technology interests. The universities from Berkeley to Stanford were right there. And then there was the private capital that emerged as venture capital, but there was also government support. People don't always realize the role of government, but I think so much of what government can do is in the investments that they make. In the US, it was large investments in defense, of course, over years. And it was really the Defense Department that invented the internet. It was just made a public internet later on. So much of the big investment made by governments should be made free and available to free enterprise, and is try to develop a Guatemalan technology sector. Another fascinating thing, though, so we have we have our under 30, which was a list we created 8 years ago where we identify young people under 30 who are doing extraordinary things. And we select 30 people from 20 different categories, from technology to science to food and entertainment, all these different categories. And it's become a huge franchise for us of this very connected group around the world who are young folks doing great things. And we say they're going to be the people who will be running the world for the next 50 years or so. And what we have found is we've worked directly with governments around the world to bring this under 30 to market. So, you know, we've been in bigger markets like in Israel and Tel Aviv, and in Amsterdam and in Paris and in Berlin. But we've also brought it at the behest of the government to Bulgaria and Botswana. And what's happening around the world is everyone knows they need to create a technology ecosystem. And they also need to create an environment that the best and brightest young kids coming up and out of universities want to stay in the country and contribute, as opposed to go where the jobs are or where the money is. So it's an interesting way, and I think that should get easier for countries to do as the best and the brightest can network with the world from their home again, or from whatever city they choose to live in. And that's a phenomenon we've seen really grow up around this under 30 network, which is now about 8 years old and has about, I think, 3,500 or 4,000 or so people around the world, because we do it in different sectors. So it's interesting, but government too, I will say, I don't know enough about the Guatemalan government, but it will be the key, I think, to unleashing free enterprise to develop. But it has to start, I think, with that recognition at government, the highest levels, that you have to make that investment, both in creating the ecosystem as well as opening up and being as transparent as possible in the investments that governments make into it. So about 12 years ago, I started a company called Techonomy, which was the combination of the economy is driven by technology, so tech and economy. And the idea was to work with Fortune 500 companies in putting technology at the center of strategy. And that is key. I think that's the most important thing the private sector can do, or business, is to embrace, to recognize that technology is going to drive their business no matter what business they're in. And you look at all the examples of Amazon disintermediating retail, or Uber disintermediating the taxi system, and and on and on. So companies need, at the CEO level and at the board level, need to make sure that technology is part of strategy and not a service, as a lot of people still think of it as, oh, that's just, we have the tech guys over here who will service the company and keep it running. But it really does need to be put in the center there. And that usually requires a significant investment too, not only in strategy, but in technology and the right people. And it's also embracing that concept that, well, I'll use the analogy what happened in the media business in the US, because I know it well, but it applies to all businesses. Intellectually, everyone knew they had to change, that the digital transformation was going to upset the old print media world. And, but so intellectually they knew it, but emotionally they couldn't quite get there, because that was the bit to where they are. The business was still good at that time, and they couldn't imagine, how do I how do I try to destroy my own business to make that transition to what the new world is? And Forbes, fortunately, and this goes before my time there, made that commitment to changing, made the investments to make the change. And as a result, we have completely distanced ourselves from what was our old competitive set. And we're now competing in a much different arena of digital media and digital journalism. So a lot of it is that kind of emotional, again, I don't think you find any CEO of a company who intellectually doesn't realize that we've got to do something around technology or be part of the digital transformation. But emotionally, it's very hard to make that change because it requires a real difference in the way that you do things and a potential risk that the digital transformation strategy you put in place may not pan out exactly as you had hoped for. So, that becomes part of the high wire act of making that change. I would also say there are easier things to do too in terms of embracing the changes that are going on now, which is embracing the connectedness that you're seeing through communications like Zoom and Google Meets and whatever other programs are out there, and making sure that your employees are all comfortable on whatever the latest technology is to stay connected and to stay collaborative in collaborative software, whether it's Slack or other programs in there. So part of it's like any exercise. You got to do it a lot in order to become fit and ready for the future. So I'd say those are the main points I would give that advice of putting technology at this. I do think I've had lots of conversations on this with different industries, particularly in the agriculture business and infrastructure. We do a conference called Ag Tech, and it's all about, there's kind of this generational shift going on in agriculture where, a lot of American farming and growing are multi-generational families. And the kids who are taking over now are much more technologically savvy and interested in making the tech investments into the industry than their parents were. So we're seeing some dramatic change there. And when COVID hit, the food supply chain became probably maybe the most important supply chain out there. And it required collaboration in the industry to get together, collaboration with the transportation industry, how we get food to markets, and through collaboration with competitors that you might not often work with, they were able to keep the supply chain going smoothly. And another category was healthcare, of course. And it's interesting, I think COVID's gonna usher in and accelerate telemedicine, because a lot of doctors started to go directly to the patients. And in the US, there are all these HIPAA compliances on what you can and can't do in healthcare, and it's mostly built around privacy and things like that. They relaxed the rules so that doctors and patients could get on Zoom calls, which by HIPAA is not allowed currently for whatever reason. But so we're seeing a much more efficient use of, why drive an hour to your doctor's office, wait for 45 minutes for your doctor, and then drive, get the diagnosis, then drive home, when you can do it all on the phone and the doctor can see that many more patients. And there's a whole supply chain growing up around that around online pharmacies and online immediate healthcare for less important issues. So again, I think you're going to see, I know governments and industry are looking at the vulnerable points that have come up in this pandemic. And I think you'll see supply chains and other direct-to-consumer sort of models really accelerate during this time. And that's going to be critical, and I think that will be long-lasting as well. Because, once you learn to shop online, it's a hell of a lot easier than driving to the mall or whatever. Now, you may want to go to the mall once in a while for social interaction or see friends or whatever. But, if you can build a better mousetrap, as we say, consumers will go to it. And that's where a lot of the changes are happening up here, is that direct-to-consumer. Even restaurants, think about that. I mean, all those restaurants shut down, but they're being innovative in their models too, because the food supply chain wants that same source of customer. And so it's required the restaurants to get creative by creating outdoor areas in the summertime. I don't know how that will work in the winter, but also they've created big kitchens in warehouses that are set up just to deliver the food to, in cities and urban centers where there's density enough to do that. So again, that goes back to adaptability and being innovative, and necessity is the mother of invention, as an old saying.